My name's Kim Nibarger. I'm a health and safety specialist for the United Steelworkers International Union. Well, for the oil refinery sector in our last session of oil bargaining, we tried to get a full-time process safety rep in place that would be a union worker who was involved with the company's process safety standards. And we think that without any union involvement, we don't see any way of making any improvements in the facilities. Another thing that we looked at was some work around the fatigue standards. It's been an issue identified not only in the Texas City refinery incident, but several others. Long working hours, consecutive work days, and it's proved to be a problem. So anything that happens in these refineries is bound to affect the communities, because even though they talk about the fence lines and nothing ever gets out the fence lines, we know that's not entirely true if you look at the communities around the facilities. So not only do we have the workers in the plant, but we have our families and friends that live outside, and so we're equally concerned about their well-being.
Now, I mean, the conditions in a union plant, a non-union plant, what are they like?
Well, I haven't been to many non-union plants, but we know from some conversations we've had with them on organizing campaigns and just being at different conferences, different times, they don't have the ability to complain about health and safety issues that you do in a union plant. It's tough enough in a union facility, right? And we all know that you can easily be fired, whistleblower act or not. I mean, that's no deterrent to the companies. But at least you have a union to protect you or to fight to get your job back, where the non-union facilities, if you complain, or a lot of the contractors, even in our union plants, if the non-union contractors complain, they're usually gone pretty quick too. So, as bad as we think conditions are at times in our sites, the non-union facilities are worse.
Now, in a plant, in a refinery, if, like at Chevron, they see there's a problem, there's a leak, the workers wanted to close it down. And this seems to be a problem all over the country. The workers see there's a serious problem, they try to address it, and they don't have the authority and the right, the power, really, to close the plants down.
Well, yeah, and they do have the authority in most instances, right? Because the company always holds up the stop work authority card and says the employees have the ability or the authority to stop work, but they don't have the power to stop work, and there's a difference there. The company maintains the power, and that goes back to this safety culture that we hear talked about all the time. You can only have a safety culture in a harmonious environment where everybody's on the same level. And that's not true in the refining industry. The management holds all the power. They have the final say, and they make the decisions no matter what kind of input. Not only workers, but you saw with the Texas City, with the CSB report on Chevron, the engineers didn't have that power either. They had the authority, but they didn't have the power either.
Well, these energy companies, these oil refineries, they retaliate. They have a history of retaliating against whistleblowers. People are intimidated. Has any executive or manager gone to jail for firing somebody at a refinery for complaining about health and safety?
Not only have they not gone to jail for firing somebody, they haven't gone to jail for killing somebody.
So people have been killed and there's been no accountability.
Well, somebody's in charge, right? It's no different than driving your car and you run over a pedestrian in the crosswalk because you couldn't stop, right? You didn't intend to do that, but you're in charge of the car. It's no different than not maintaining these oil refineries and having equipment break. You're in charge. You need to be held accountable. And in my opinion, until that day comes, you're not going to see this industry change.
And the energy companies, they seem to be able to control Congress. I mean, the number of inspectors, I was shocked in California, 4 refineries, only 7 chemical and refineries for the whole state of California. I mean, what kind of oversight is going on in the industry independently by government agencies?
Yeah, not very much. And again, OSHA's underfunded, understaffed. They don't have the expertise or the people to do this job. And, quite frankly, we say the oil companies have more money than God. They've been able to essentially control the politicians through donations. And we haven't had any changes in the OSHA regulations since it was enacted in the 70s.
And the issue for your members also of contamination. I mean, you have the communities are contaminated, but your members are in these plants dealing with these highly toxic materials. Is there a problem of health for your members? What is the situation of your members?
I think everybody that's worked in an oil refinery has somebody they worked with that has died at a fairly young age or even shortly after retirement of some sort of cancer, something that's probably outside of that normal cluster range for diseases. I can think of 3 or 4 guys that I worked with that are younger than I that are dead from cancers.
And I mean, it seems like it's all over the country. I mean, where you have these refineries, you don't really have proper health and safety protection. Why isn't it a national public issue? I mean, you have these explosions ongoing on a regular basis, and yet there doesn't seem to be the action to say we're going to change this situation, this dynamic.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's for one thing. Usually, when workers are killed on the job, it's usually 1 or maybe 2 at a time. Even though there's 14 a day, I think is the national average. It's only 1 or 2 at a time, and it doesn't get anybody's attention, right? So when you get something like the fertilizer explosion in West Texas the other day, it's my feeling you have to, I say, a handful. So if you don't kill 5 or more people, you just don't get any attention. And fortunately, we don't have a lot of those, multiple fatality accidents, and it just doesn't get the attention that it deserves. Fortunately, our folks in Texas are organized, but a lot of their neighbors aren't, and so there's concern about a lot of the non-union chemical plants because they don't have the opportunity to have the same kind of safeguards as we do at our facilities.
So, but I mean, what's the oversight? I mean, what happens?
Well,
I mean, you call in the government and nobody's there.
I mean, you're probably not very likely to call in OSHA if you're at a non-union facility. And even our folks calling them in, oftentimes it's several days before they can get to a site to investigate a complaint, because if they're out on another fatality or another investigation, there just aren't enough people to go around. So a response is sometimes slower than it could be.
So you had national negotiations where you raised health and safety issues
Yes.
to rectify some of these problems. Maybe you can talk about that and what the industry said in opposing those proposals.
Well, yeah, most of them were turned down by the industry. I talked about the process safety rep and the fatigue issues earlier. We were able to get those 2 through, although the fatigue is not being addressed the way we had hoped it would be. It's a staffing issue, right? There's not enough people in the facilities. And so the only way to take care of the fatigue issue is to hire an adequate number of people to staff the job positions, and that's not the way the industry is going about it.
Should there be certification, federal certification, to work in a place like a refinery so that you're required to have training and you can't just be brought in?
I think, and I mean, there is to a degree under the process safety management standard. There's certain requirements that you have to operate in the facility. And I think the proprietary employees, the folks that we represent, have adequate training and are well enough versed in the procedures and understand the hazards that it's not an issue. The concern is with the contractors, particularly coming in doing maintenance, the non-union contractors that are doing the maintenance work that don't necessarily receive the same kind of training, although they're supposed to according to the standard.
And has there been any prosecution of these energy companies, oil companies, for bringing in people who aren't trained to do repair work? And even though it's a requirement in the law.
Right. Yep. And we talked about the OSHA standard the other night at the Chevron meeting. The problem is the standard says you're required to have a written program, but it doesn't require you to have necessarily a good written program. And so it's a minimum wage standard, right? You are required to do the absolute minimum, and that's what the companies are doing.
Do you think if these managers and executives were criminally prosecuted, it would have an effect on how the refineries are operated?
I think it would certainly get somebody's attention. Yep,
So it would.
I think it would have an effect.
And why is it that in refineries in Europe, in England, and Japan, they have less incidents of explosions and fires in the refinery industry?
Well, yeah, I can't speak to that. I guess for sure, but some of the incidents or some of the information I've seen says that maintenance is more regularly performed there. The turnarounds are more regularly performed overseas than here. We know employee work hours are less, they're regulated, and so, you probably don't have fatigued employees working, so that lessens the risk.
So in Waco, Texas, for example, I mean, it sounds like there was very little regulation and oversight. I mean, it was an ammonia plant. It was very dangerous, but there wasn't really proper oversight. So.
It appears that way, and grandfathered regulations, right? It's my understanding that facility was in before there were setback requirements, and so that allowed them to continue to operate in an area that close to the school or the rest home. It had never been revisited.
And the community, these contaminants, I mean, that are coming from these refineries, what should be done so that you even know what you're getting? I mean, because there's a lot of this stuff that's coming out in the air.
Yeah. I think there needs to be more monitoring. I think we hear a lot of talk about fence line monitoring, and I think one of the problems is a lot of the material is floating over the fence line. I think you need to do some like plume mapping for the areas and see where the predominant wind direction is, how far out does that carry before it drops, and look at some of those areas to be putting monitors and see how much material is getting out of the plants. A lot of the stack monitoring, I mean, it may tell you what's coming out of the stack, but it doesn't tell you where it's going or where it's ending up in the community.
And a lot of your members, not just the community, but a lot of your members inside these plants are getting sick. They get cancer. What's happening nationally with refinery workers in the industry as far as their health conditions?
I don't think they're getting any better. It's been a point of concern for us. I guess it's kind of a project in progress. It's something that started back in the 70s, and for various reasons, we just haven't done. The union hasn't done as good a job as it should have, but it's something that certainly has our attention.
But I mean, without a union, then there'll be
without a union, you don't have much. Yeah, you don't have much hope.
So nobody is really paying attention
exactly.
unless you have a union
Yep.
fighting to at least find out what's
right.
going on. And I mean, it seems like that this really only becomes a public issue when there's an explosion, like in Chevron, or when there's a big fire, and then it becomes a public issue. But it's not a real political issue as far as we've got to get something done.
It's not. There's no sense of a problem, I don't think, by the community, because it happens. I don't want to say rarely, because the industry self-reported since 2007 on the records we've been keeping about 41 fires a year. And the fires they're reporting are the ones that can be seen outside the fence line. They're not reporting the small seal fires, the pump fires, electrical fires inside that you can't see. So, I mean, it's a concern, but for most of the public, it's not something that they see because it's in another part of the country.
I mean, it seems like, as far as finding out what contaminants are in the air, it's like we send Curiosity, spend billions of dollars to Mars, and we can find out what's in Mars, but we can't find out what's in these communities.
Right, and I think it's, probably the biggest problem is not having the sensing material in the right areas.
And where should it be? In these areas?
Like I say, I think we need to look at some plume maps and some weather maps and see where that material is being carried out into the community. I don't think the fence line monitoring gives you an accurate picture.
And at the hearing at Chevron with the Chemical and Safety Board, they said that it would be like a minute amount of money to have really proper supervision and do what is required. The amount of money from the industry, if the industry was to pay for this, what percentage would it be for these refineries to pay for something like
Well,
this?
they had the conversation at the Chevron hearing that if there was a fee imposed on the refiners of a penny a barrel for the crude processed in the refineries, they could raise $6 million a year, which would certainly be a start in getting some more regulators, inspectors. Right, yep.
And I mean, but how many inspectors does it take? It seems like 7 inspectors, just one refinery. These are major facilities. I mean,
Yeah.
there are thousands of pipes, and I mean, just to inspect a refinery is a big job. I mean,
It is, yeah. And it's different than going into a manufacturing facility where you can look at guards and stair rails and stair treads, and I mean they're pretty easy to see. Refining facilities or petrochemical facilities are different in the sense that it's not so much what the equipment looks like, but it's the ability for them to handle any potential problems that may arise from the operation. So are they doing the proper inspections? You know, that's one side of things. The other side is the issue of leading indicators, and something like the number of times a process is out of a safe operating limit. Not necessarily in the flare where there's a failure, but when it gets outside of that safe operating limit. Maybe we should monitor that. If it's out 10 times in a week, maybe you need to do something with your operating process to keep it back in that area. So that might be something to look at. Again, the issue of clamps. If you have to put a clamp on a pipe, there's a problem. And so
these are high pressure, extremely toxic materials,
toxic, flammable. Yep,
and they had hundreds of clamps.
Hundreds, and it's not unique to Chevron by any means, right? That it's pretty common. And if you have a clamp because you have a weak spot in a line here, what's to say you're not going to have one 10 feet down the line? The next problem that comes with the clamps is, depending on the configuration of the pipe and the number of clamps, is it structurally able to support that extra weight? That's a whole nother issue that hasn't you don't hear anybody talking about.
Now, the United Steelworkers has been involved in an alliance with environmental groups, different communities. How do you see the strategy of linking up with the community environmental groups to protect health and safety of the workers and the communities?
Well, I think it goes hand in hand because, like I said, you know, we're concerned about the health and safety of our members inside the facility, but we're all also concerned about our family and friends that live outside the community. So I think it's you know, I think it's a good mix. I don't believe the environmental people want to put the workers out of work. I think they want the same thing as us. They want these facilities operated in a safe and environmentally sound manner.
And it requires a big movement to do that.
And it does, yep.
So are you optimistic? It seems like you go from one disaster
yeah,
to another.
If I wasn't, I wouldn't be here, right? I mean, if I didn't think there was hope or that something could be done, I'd retire and go fishing. But I really think that we can make some changes in this industry. And I think, you know, the workers need to be more aware of what's going on in the facilities. They need to make demands of their employers that the facilities are operated safe. And I think we need to involve the community so that they understand, because you're not going to make an effect on these companies without public input. That's how we got the airlines operating in a safer manner. That's how we got the nuclear facilities operating in a safer manner, was from pressure from the public. And we need to give the regulators more authority. So, you know, industry, the employers, the regulators, and the community all need to sit down and work together. And I believe that these facilities can be operated in a safe manner.
And the issue of cancer, I mean, it seems like there's a cancer epidemic in the United States from chemicals. I mean, what is going on with cancer, the cancers that people are getting in this country?
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't, it seems like it's at a higher rate among folks that I know that work in the petrochemical industry than outside. and that OSHA uses, EPA uses, you find a lot of those in the petrochemical industry. So you're exposed to a lot of potential carcinogen identified chemicals.
And when it blows up and when there's a big fire, it spreads out.
Then the community gets exposed, right? Yep, and that's the thing we're trying to curb.